Well, if you've made it this far, you are in the fantasy playoffs. Maybe you earned a first round bye, or maybe you snuck in on a stat correction. It doesn't matter. You are in. Just win out. This is the Double I Show Fantasy Island podcast, and I'm Bombo. A quick update on the Fantasy Island crew. Sweet Tea and King have a first round showdown in one of our leagues. That'll be a classic Cain and Abel battle. As for me, I'm in the playoffs in all leagues that I am in, no seed lower than third. Fantasy gods have been friendly this year, plus a little bit of luck. Shout out to all the teams and the commissioners that allow us to do what we do. But before we get into our Week 15 first round preview, make sure to follow the show wherever you consume your fantasy content, including our YouTube page. The Week 15 playoff primer, let's get it started. We'll get it started with key injuries and pickups for Week 15, the first round of the fantasy playoffs. These players are currently hurting, and you will need to monitor their injury reports and practice participation. Tyreek Hill has an ankle issue. He finished Week 14's game, but was certainly feeling it. He was definitely on a pitch count. Tyreek Hill at half speed is still superhuman. If he's available, you have to play him. If he plays, he's in your lineup. But they also could use him as a decoy, which could spell disaster for your team. You just got to roll the dice. Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs has a shoulder injury that kept him out of action in Week 14. If he misses Week 15, Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jerick McKinnon will split carries. Both of those guys together would be a great back to take the place of Isaiah Pacheco, but since they're both going to be splitting carries, I would only start them in an absolute emergency. The Green Bay Packers, Aaron Jones still has that knee lingering, but is close to getting back as he practiced all week in limited fashion last week. It may come down to a game time decision for him. AJ Dillon is still an emergency start and has a pretty solid floor based on his volume versus Tampa, but that could potentially be a air it out game for Jordan Love. In Washington, Brian Robinson still has that hamstring issue. He's going to be hard to trust. Antonio Gibson is a solid flex to start versus the Rams if Brian Robinson can't go. Nico Collins with a calf injury and CJ Stroud in the concussion protocol are far from locks to play this week. If Stroud can't go, fade all Texans, including Nico Collins, unless you have no choice. I don't trust Davis Mills. In Indianapolis, Jonathan Taylor is still out with a thumb issue. You're going to have to monitor what his practice participation will be like, but it looks like Zach Moss will get the start at least one more time. Zach Moss is a must start until JT gets back. For the Cleveland Browns, Jerome Ford has a wrist injury. He will be limited all week and will more likely split carries with Kareem Hunt versus the Bears. He could be started, but just know his ceiling is very much capped. Geno Smith, quarterback for the Seahawks, was close to suiting up in Week 14, but it came down to a game-time decision. The Seahawks need him versus the Eagles, so he'll probably play, but I wouldn't start him. Jamar Chase and Chris Olave are both wide receiver one potential guys in Week 15, but they're also both nursing ankle injuries that just popped up. Stay glued to the news on them. If they go, you start them. Now we're going to get into our Week 15 playoff tactics. These are just some tips and tricks that I've learned throughout my years, that the team here has learned throughout their years on how to gear up for the playoffs, because once you get in the playoffs, it's a whole nother monster. First thing, remember, all you have to do is beat your opponent. There's no more seeding, no more looking ahead, no more trying to build a dominant roster. Right now, it's week to week. You just have to win 1 week. Win this week, win the next week, win the next week. You're playing that guy, just beat that guy. And in order to do that, brings us to our next point. Take advantage of matchups, including playing a wide receiver that plays alongside of your opponent's quarterback. That's just one tactic. File that under if one eats, we all eat. This goes without saying, but some that are newer to fantasy, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. Do not play a defense that is going against any one of your studs. Doesn't help anyone if you're shooting yourself in the foot. Another key to remember for the playoffs, dump roster weight for key pickups and to block opportunities for your opponent, like picking up the handcuffs to his running backs, picking up the number twos for his receivers, picking up his backup quarterback. Also make sure that you have your next man up on your roster just in case one of your studs goes down. That's just good defense in the fantasy world. And my last playoff tactic, it's more of a piece of advice. Don't get caught up in projection. I repeat, if you could take anything away from this show, if you could take anything away from what Bombo is trying to tell you, do not get caught up in projections. That's a lazy way to go about gauging what your team's strengths are. I repeat, Do not get caught up in projections. I hate to be a cliche, but it's any given Sunday. At any time, someone can go off. At any time, someone could be a bum. Don't get caught up in the projections. Use them as a starting point and then go from there. One thing to remember about this week 15 playoff, Thursday and Saturday games change everything. If your opponent's studs play early and flop, you can be more flexible with your Sunday starters. You can take more risks. And if your studs ball out in the early games, it puts a ton of pressure on your opponents. And you could ease back knowing that he's probably checking his lineup every 20 minutes, second guessing himself, and doing all that he can to try to make up for the lead that he already are in. Now for our week 15 playoff locks and big games. I'm going to run off some names here. Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, DeAndre Swift, Jalen Hurts, Calvin Ridley, Devontae Adams. What do these guys have in common? They probably all cost you your week in week 14. What else do these guys have in common? These are not easy locks, set it and forget it. You're going to have to do some thinking on this one. First thing, all these guys have great matchups and you're going to need to start them. Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, Josh Allen, Brock Purdy, Lamar Jackson, and Justin Fields. Those are your starting quarterbacks. If they're on your roster, you're starting them. Like we said before, if you got more than one of these guys on your roster, that's a rich man's problem. Flip a coin. Another playoff lock, start the Rams. Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp. They will ball against the Commanders with playoffs hopes on the line. Plus, Washington is a fantasy feeding frenzy. That defense cannot stop a nosebleed. A playoff lock, start all your wide receiver ones, even if the QB is iffy, like a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson. It's super simple. It's a wide receiver dominant league. It's a wide receiver dominant fantasy landscape. If you have a guy that's been a wide receiver one all year, stick it out, especially if he still has the quarterback on the roster right now that got him in wide receiver one status. Unless the quarterback is absolutely abysmal, unless the quarterback is a straight up bum, you can still possibly start some of these guys like a Jamar Chase, even though Browning's not a really huge bum. But Nick Mullins for the Vikings, you're still going to start Justin Jefferson. You just have to reel in those expectations. But for all these other wide receiver ones who still have their quarterback that they've had all year, fire them up. Playoff lock, running backs, Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and David Montgomery, Raheem Mostert, and Devon Achane are all in great starting spots. Now is not the time to second guess any of those guys. Put them in your lineup. They are going against defenses that have a ton of yards and touchdowns. Playoff lock advice, don't get cute with your tight ends. See what we did there? Kittle, Kelsey, Laporta, Ingram, Njoku are all must starts this week, but you already knew that. If your opponent is streaming a tight end, you have the advantage. These are your week 15 playoff huge fantasy games. Broncos at Lions, Cowboys at Bills, Eagles at Seahawks. All of these games have the potential to have all fantasy stars shine. Start everyone in these games. Here's a list of some playoff key sleepers in good matchups based on volume, analytics, and my gut. Garrett Wilson versus Miami. Quarterback Jordan Love versus the Bucs pass funnel. Zeke in New England versus a very exposed KC team. Tight end Trey McBride for the Cardinals. He's the only unguardable weapon for the Cardinals right now in a game where they're going to have to pass a lot in order to keep up. Also start Cortland Sutton versus the Lions because all he does is catch touchdowns. Saquon Barkley and Tommy DeVito, Tommy Cutlet are rolling and the Giants have life versus the Saints. So Saquon is back to a low-end RB1 based on volume. He could be trusted. And Joe Flacco may be the most trustworthy streaming option this week versus the Bears. That goes out to all you Herbert owners that got some bad news starting this week. There's some sleepers that we have identified here on the island that can get you where you want to go. Also, something to remember, if you are one of those guys that has been streaming a quarterback this whole time, you have been streaming a tight end this whole time, or you did go zero running back draft and you've been operating with RB3s and guys off the waiver wire and you made the playoffs, guess what? You know how to navigate a team. You know how to run a franchise. Don't be surprised if you go into the playoffs against a guy that has a stacked team full of studs. Don't go away from what got you there. Don't be scared. Goes back to what I was saying about projections. If you see that you're going against a team that is projected to blow you out of the water, don't give up faith. Make sure that that team knows that you belong there too, and that your strategy got you where you need to be. And that's right there with them. Hopefully, this gets you prepared for your playoff matchup. And we will be here with you throughout the playoffs here on Fantasy Island to make sure that you are getting to that championship, wearing that ring, hanging that banner, and of course, getting all the bragging rights. On behalf of Sweet Tea, on behalf of RW King, I'm your boy Bombo. Till next time, we're out.